Good evening, everybody. Geez, thank you for being here. My name is Keith Nye. I'm the Deputy Insurance Commissioner I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the New Hampshire Insurance Department, and I'm here today with my colleagues several colleagues from the Insurance Department and for the Department of Planning and Development. And we're here to talk to you today about flood insurance. And I'm just going to start off by saying that, flooding is obviously one of those disasters that you really can't plan for, that you try to plan for, but always has a very, very big impact on people's lives. So I'll kind of kick off my portion by saying that, your basic homeowners insurance policy and your basic business policy does not include coverage for that catastrophic event of flooding. So here today, we're going to turn it over to our friends from the Office of, Planning and Economic Development. They're going to talk to you a little bit about the National Flood Insurance Program, and that's going to be followed up by a presentation from my colleague Lou Ann King to talk about private flood insurance. So on that, thank you very much for being here today, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Heather Shank.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to mention a few things. I wrote them down, but I'm realizing now even this 16-point font is too small for me to see. So if I lift my glasses, hopefully some of you can understand why that is. Just for some context, so I'm Heather Shank. I'm the director of the Division of Planning and Community and Development at the Department of Business and Economic Affairs. I was going to point to the BEA, but it's already gone. Just for some context, so BEA is one of the departments of the state, and our division hasn't been around too long. A Division of Planning and Community Development was just created in this last budget cycle. The offices beneath the Division of Planning and Community Development have actually been around for a lot longer in different areas. Many of the offices at BEA, as the title would indicate, Business and Economic Affairs, have to do with private development and encouraging private development. However, Department of Planning and Community Development, our programs are actually geared towards providing assistance to municipalities. So all of our offices are geared towards the public and providing assistance to municipalities. We have the Office of Broadband Initiatives, which you may have heard about, providing broadband services throughout the state. We administer grant programs to provide broadband services the goal is 100% access across the state. The Office of Housing and Infrastructure Development, you may have heard of some of the Housing Champion grants and the Invest New Hampshire grants that have gone toward workforce housing. That's another one of our offices. And then the Office of Planning and Development, OPD, which is probably our most famous, revered, popular office. It's been around for decades, and OPD offers a number of programs pertaining to municipalities. I won't go into all of them because there's quite a few, but one of those pertaining to land use regulation, the municipal land use regulation program is very popular, but also we run the floodplain management program. So the floodplain management program also has a number of initiatives. Among them is administering the National Flood Insurance Program. This is partially funded by FEMA. So FEMA gives us money to give to to provide assistance to municipalities, consultants, members of the public, even realtors. We get realtors call us all the time, to help them understand flood risk, flood regulation, flood maps, and to help them understand how to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. So today I have Sarah Thunberg and Stephanie Frechette. They run the floodplain management program at BEA, and they're going to share some basic information on flooding, how FEMA assesses risk and assesses costs and rates, how to participate in the NFIP, and I think they're going to get pretty in the nitty-gritty, so with some actual technical information about how to comply and how to participate and how to comply with FEMA standards. So on that note, I would turn it over to Sarah and Stephanie.
Alrighty, let me see if I can go back. Okay, so I am Sarah Thunberg. This here is Stephanie Frechette. We are the two National Flood Insurance Program coordinators. the National Flood Insurance Program staff is all relatively new, so we've got a new program and a lot of eagerness to make the program better. So, Stephanie, if you wanted to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about
Yeah, my background.
yeah.
I'm Stephanie Frechette. As Sarah mentioned, we coordinate the National Flood Insurance Program. I've been doing it for just under a year now, so I'm pretty new to this group. Previously, I worked for the state for the past 10 years doing planning and coordination and technical assistance to municipalities on state and federal regulations. And I have my bachelor's degree in environmental science and a concentration in water resources.
And I am Sarah Thunberg. I have been the National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator for a little over a year. I started in May of 2024. Before that, before working for the state of New Hampshire, I was a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Gray, Maine, the local weather forecast office for Maine and New Hampshire. And I have my master's in atmospheric science, aka meteorology, from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And just since we are here at the Mount Washington Observatory's conference room, I did throw in that I was a summer intern at the Mount Washington Observatory in 2017. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to go over the types of flooding that we see up here in the White Mountains specifically. And then we're going to go over the National Flood Insurance Program and then the roles and responsibilities that we at the state and community officials have as part of the National Flood Insurance Program. And then we'll go over some of the regulations that communities have to adopt if they are participating. And we're also going to give you guys a little bit of an update on what the mapping status is, because I know you maybe have heard that most of New Hampshire is getting their floodplains remapped right now. So we'll have a little update on when you guys can expect those updated maps to come out. So I'm going to start off with talking about the types of flooding and their risks associated with each type of flooding. So the most common type of flooding that you are likely familiar with is what we call river and inland flooding, which is when the water levels rise over the top of riverbanks due to excessive rainfall, persistent thunderstorms, or snowmelt, any long duration weather event that is adding water either to the soil or from the atmosphere. Generally, these have large areas of impact because these are commonly created from large storm systems. And generally, these types of floodings will, since they generate from the river, will spread out up above the riverbanks and along the mapped floodway. Since these events are larger, they are easier to see coming, so generally they're a little bit more predictable and easier to plan for because you know where the water is going to be flowing to and what areas are going to be flooded. I added in a picture here from Conway from April 30th, 2023, when we had a very warm storm system come up and it rained a lot, and by April, there was still a good amount of snowpack on the ground, and so that warm rain on top of the snow combined to create a very large flooding event and cut off several major roads throughout Conway and the White Mountain or Mount Washington Valley. All right, so the next type of flooding that you guys are likely familiar with is flash flooding. These are generally caused by excessive rainfall in a short period of time. Generally, it's less than 6 hours, and these create high velocity torrents of water after heavy rains that rip through the riverbeds, urban streets, or mountain canyons. Flash floods are shorter than your river flooding. They're generally minutes to hours long and have a smaller area of impact, somewhere between like 1 to 5 square miles, relatively small. And these waters will eventually drain into the floodplain, but since it is from a thunderstorm, anywhere it can rain is where the flooding could occur. So this is not, flash floods are not necessarily going to stay within the mapped floodplain, which is why they can be harder to plan for, and they are lower predictability because it's such a small area of devastating impacts. I have 2 pictures here from Goshen and Alexandria that can depict 2 types of damage that you can see from flash flooding. So one of them is the water will carve away the riverbeds and the dirt, leaving foundations exposed, and you can have structural failures. Now, on the other end, all of that sediment needs to go somewhere, and so in Alexandria in June 2023, they saw many dirt roads washed out, and then at the intersection below it, this is 4 feet of gravel piled up at the bottom of the road. On the bottom image, right here, that is a stop sign. So this is 4 feet of gravel that came down the road. So as well as carving away the roads, they can also block roads because when you move dirt from one place, it has to go somewhere else. All right, so the last type of flooding that we commonly see up in the White Mountains is ice jam flooding. Now this is from when chunks of ice pile up at a narrow point in the river. And this restricts the flow of water, causing the water to quickly rise upstream of the ice jam, flooding the surrounding area. Now, similarly to your river flooding, these types of flooding, since they do generate from the river, will spread out along the mapped floodplains. However, these have a much more variable duration because the flood will persist as long as that jam is there. Now, some communities are used to these types of flooding and have equipment to go deal with and break up ice jams. Other communities don't have things to deal with ice jams, and so depending on the resources available, the ice jam could last for days, or it could only be for a couple hours. And these have low predictability because they are not necessarily associated with a storm that you can forecast. It just kind of happens. Generally these happen in the spring as you have ice that builds up on the river, and then it gets warmer, the ice starts breaking up and flushes out, and then it just gets consolidated into a narrow point. So I have a couple animations, or just one animation here that shows how an ice jam will pile up and flood along a river. This river is in Alaska. Unfortunately, I did not have a great example of recent ice jam flooding up here in the White Mountains. All right, so now that we've kind of talked about the types of flooding and what hazards and risks are associated with the types of flooding, Stephanie is going to talk about what flood insurance can bring to the table.
Excuse me, what would happen if a water main broke and your house got flooded?
That would be, you would kind of consider that a flash flood, I guess. Technically through the National Weather Service, they would forecast it as a flash flood because that's a type of warning that would be associated with that. But yeah, at least with a water main, you have a power shutoff somewhere. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. So the National Flood Insurance Program, we're going to be talking about later on in the presentation what it is, how it works, but for now, just to give an overview of the program, we refer to this program as a three-legged stool where you have floodplain mapping, regulations, and flood insurance. So you need to know your risks by looking at flood mapping reducing your risks by adopting floodplain management regulations and insuring your risk with flood insurance.
Excuse me, Steph, could you
Yeah.
speak up just a little bit?
Okay.
Thanks.
So flood insurance is always a good idea to have it because, like Sarah mentioned, anywhere it rains, it can flood. Flood insurance is recommended whether or not you live in a special flood hazard area because it can happen anywhere that it rains. For national flood insurance communities, anyone in the community can purchase flood insurance through this program. Many people don't realize that flooding is not typically covered under traditional home insurance options. And you may often hear of grants that are available after large flooding events, but often those require a presidential declaration where flood insurance doesn't, it's not covered. So covering you even in small events or in events where a few properties are affected. I should also note that business owners are eligible to purchase flood insurance as well. So it's a good idea to purchase flood insurance since flooding is a risk that occurs anywhere that it rains. Lender floodplain requirements. So there are times when flood insurance is required, and that is a condition of federally backed mortgages. Lending institutions utilize the FEMA flood maps and the identified special flood hazard areas to determine this. It's the responsibility of the lender or someone working for the lender to determine if a specific property is subject to that requirement. And if so, flood insurance would be required for the life of the loan. Once the loan was paid off, the property owner could choose whether to continue having flood insurance or not. One thing that is important to remember is that the community's floodplain regulations apply for the entire community for any development that's occurring in the special flood hazard area, regardless of whether that property has flood insurance or not. It can be a common misconception that regulations only apply if a property owner has flood insurance, but that is incorrect. Your community's floodplain regulations apply to all development that's occurring in the special flood hazard area, whether or not the property owner has current flood insurance policies in place. So this was updated a couple days ago based on data in New Hampshire. So as of September of this year, there's $1.6 billion in total coverage, over 7,500 policies, and $8 million in total premiums. And we wanted to talk a little bit about how premiums are calculated. So this is through a system called FEMA's Risk Rating 2.0. This went into effect in April of 2022, and this is the methodology that FEMA uses to price flood insurance. It was recently updated to make rates more fair and more equitable so that properties are paying based on their individual risk rather than what specific special flood hazard area they're located in. And as it went into effect recently in 2022, it's been a few years now, and all policies in New Hampshire should be, their premium should have been calculated using this new methodology. So we'll talk about a couple different factors that go into this methodology. This has changed how flood risks and therefore how policy premiums are calculated. Flood risks will now be determined using a combination of factors and data sources rather than using FEMA flood maps alone. As shown in this graphic and on the following two slides, Risk Rating 2.0 uses many factors to determine a property's specific risks, and we'll go through them, which include where a property is built, how it's built, like the building characteristics, and what is built. So firstly, Risk Rating 2.0 considers where a property is located, including a building's distance to flooding sources, the ground elevation, and
other characteristics such as whether a community is participating in the CRS system, community rating system. So those are just a couple examples for how risk rating is affecting the location. The second factor included in this is how the building is built. These building characteristics include building occupancy, the foundation type, first floor height, the number of floors, machinery and equipment, flood openings. These building characteristics all play a role in how the premium is calculated. And the third and final factor is what is built and covered, meaning the replacement cost and coverage. So this includes building replacement cost value and the deductible and contents coverage chosen by the policyholder. In the NFIP, building coverage and content coverage are selected separately. So because of all of these factors, each individual property's policy premium is different, as it is specific to the exact characteristics of the structure rather than just using the flood zone that they're located in. So what's new with this methodology, it's important for those who are renewing their policies to note that they need to verify all of their rating factors with their insurance provider to ensure that their premiums do in fact reflect the property's specific flood risks based on those factors. With Risk Rating 2.0, it also eliminates the previous requirement for an elevation certificate. For insurance purposes only, only not in town regulations or development, and it also expands mitigation discounts. Communities who participate in the community rating system are now able to provide their CRS discount to all policies, no matter what special flood hazard area they live in within the community. And it also means that the preferred risk policy for structures in low-risk areas and grandfathering are being phased out, as all policies will now utilize this new Risk Rating 2.0 system in their insurance premiums. So what is not changing, the use of firms, so the flood insurance rate maps for community floodplain management regulations, those will still be used for planning purposes. Risk Rating 2.0 will have no effect on a community's current floodplain regulations, the permitting process, or the enforcement. Lender requirements for federally backed mortgages are remaining the same. Also remaining the same is the process to remove a property from the special flood hazard area, and the letter of map change process is the same. For floodplain administrators, it's important to know that although flood insurance rate maps are no longer used for insurance purposes, they are not going away and will still be used for planning purposes. Funding is distributed through the New Hampshire Department of Safety, Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. There's a couple different funding sources that are available for public disaster recovery and mitigation projects, including public assistance and individual assistance, as well as the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, and BRIC funding, although BRIC's funding is currently being assessed right now. But these are the funding options that are available, and they're administered through HSEM. Here are some links that we can share with you afterwards. The first one is a link to our OPD webpage for information on the Risk Rating 2.0 system. There's also more information at the two FEMA websites. So here we're going to discuss the roles and responsibilities at the federal, state, and local levels in implementing FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program. For some background information, the National Flood Insurance Program is a federal program that was created by Congress in 1968. It is a voluntary partnership between FEMA and communities that volunteer to join and participate in. It is not a requirement, although the majority of cities and towns in New Hampshire are participating. While this is a FEMA program, it's implemented at the state level by our office, which is the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs at the Office of Planning and Development, and we have another program, the flood insurance, the floodplain management program is the coordinating office of this program. Oops. And FEMA, the National Flood Insurance Program, like I mentioned, we refer to it as having these three components: knowing your risk by looking at your flood mapping, and reducing your risks by adopting floodplain management regulations, and then insuring those risks through flood insurance. As I mentioned, it's a voluntary program, but the majority of our communities do participate. And the way that it works is a community would agree to adopt and enforce local floodplain management regulations in their zoning ordinance that meets the minimum NFIP requirements that were set forth by FEMA. And in turn, flood insurance through the NFIP would be made available to those communities as well as residents in those communities. Currently, the majority of communities in New Hampshire are participating in this program. We have approximately 220 or 94% that are participating, and only a handful are not. So here on this map, everything in white is a participating community. All right. So here we'll go through what FEMA's role is in the National Flood Insurance Program.
Will we see that map later? Because there was one right, what's that one up on the upper right there, right in the middle? Can't tell, can you?
The red one?
Yeah, that doesn't participate, right?
Yeah, that one does not.
That's in our area.
Is it this one?
No.
Yeah, that's the
That is Randolph, yeah.
Oh, that's Randolph,
That's
okay,
Randolph.
yeah. All right, so, yeah, oh, I see the county line, okay.
Do they give a reason why they choose not to participate?
So-
They don't have to.
They don't have to give a reason.
They don't have to give a reason.
Yeah.
Again, this is a voluntary program.
Understood.
They're kind of high up.
Kinda.
There's a number of reasons. They might feel like they don't really have risk, like you're saying, they're not
The
necessarily
risk is not high
understanding.
enough.
They're not necessarily understanding that it can still flood where you are.
Exactly.
And that, you know, if
So
you don't
I-
join, your residents cannot purchase the flood insurance from FEMA at the reduced rate. So,
I'm not
just
an
curious.
insurance salesperson, but I have worked with numerous disasters and FEMA home inspectors in inspecting homes after major hurricanes and major events. And I can tell you that one of the first things they look for is the drywall damage from the bottom up or the top down?
Yeah.
And if it's from the bottom up,
Yeah, they know
you
what
better have flood insurance.
Yeah, yeah.
Regardless of what caused the water.
There can also be issues with staffing, like if you don't have the resources or the staff to do
Yeah.
the work, you know, they have to adopt the regulations, somebody has to be familiar with them to implement it. It's not a cost-free choice for a municipality to
Yeah.
join.
Sure.
And so it might just be an initial cost, but that's partly what we're here for,
Okay.
is to help them get there.
Understood. Thank you.
So this slide highlights what FEMA's responsibilities are in the NFIP program. FEMA's roles are to make flood insurance available through insurance companies for property owners, residents, and renters in participating communities. They are responsible for developing the flood maps, providing development and building guidance, and national program oversight, as well as monitoring participating communities to ensure that they are complying with the program. At the state level, our responsibilities are to provide technical assistance to all stakeholders
including answering general questions for anyone who has a question about this program, including community officials, surveyors, engineers, developers, and residents. We provide education and outreach events and resources like the state model ordinance language, fact sheets, sample permits. We assist communities in evaluating compliance of activities and proposed development in the floodplain. And we also provide assistance after a disaster when rebuilding is occurring and making sure that the minimum NFIP requirements are being met. And at the local community level, communities are responsible for understanding what your regulations are and understanding FEMA's maps that they put out, the flood insurance rate maps. A community is also responsible to ensure that permits are being applied for and issued for all development that's occurring in the special flood hazard area, and making sure that development is built to meet the community's floodplain regulations, and then taking action to enforce the regulations if and when violations occur. Okay, now I'll hand it back over to Sarah.
All right, so I'm gonna talk about the minimum NFIP requirements. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and this is just to give you a general idea. So I'm gonna try to go through it quickly so we can get on with other parts of the presentation. All right, so the community floodplain regulations, we have model ordinances at our office available for communities to essentially copy and adopt to ensure that their local floodplain regulations are 100% compliant with what FEMA requires. Now, adoption and enforcement of floodplain regulations that meet the minimum NFIP requirements are required to remain in good standing with the NFIP. And it is up to the community to take full ownership of their floodplain regulations by fully understanding and enforcing their requirements. So yeah, if you would like a copy of the model floodplain ordinances, please email Stephanie or I, and we can provide you it, because the model depends on what floodplains or what flood zones you have in your community. So we just need to make sure we provide you guys with the right one. So the minimum regulations are a good start, but we do have something called the community rating system, which incentivizes communities to elect to adopt higher floodplain standards. And if you do adopt a certain number of these standards, you can accrue points in the CRS program to then provide a discount across the board to all national flood insurance policy holders in your community. So the more higher standard regulations you have, the more benefit it is for your residences. So we have what's called a menu of higher standards here at OPD that essentially just give you a range of options of things that you can elect to adopt in your community, such as designating certain floodplain areas as open space undevelopable. Or another one is to require 3 feet of freeboard, which is the distance from the base flood elevation, that 100-year flood height, to the top of, or the bottom of the first floor, or the lowest floor height. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different actions that you can adopt at the community level to benefit your residences, or your residents. So, for permitting development in the floodplain, you have to permit all development, and that means any man-made change to the area. That includes mining or dredging, grading, paving, drilling, as well as just regular building or storage of materials, so any man-made change. And that we do have a sample floodplain permit if you would like to adopt that in addition to your building permit. This essentially has a more exhaustive list of what is considered development, but you can also just incorporate that into your regular building permit and just have the one. So in your permitting, a community must have a process to determine whether proposed development is in the special flood hazard area. You also must have a permit process for all development, not just buildings. That's what I was talking about in the slide beforehand. You also need to ensure that you have a process for documenting that finished development is actually built compliant with community's regulations. And then you also want to make sure you have an enforcement process to address non-compliance or violations. Now, a good test to see if your community is able to handle all these is, do you have these procedures written down somewhere? And can you pull just, I don't know, the mailman in and give him the procedures and a permit and see if he can review it? Because you want to make sure that anybody is able to correctly evaluate if a building permit is compliant with your floodplain regulations.
Mailman, what's he got to do?
Well, I just mean like if the person who normally does that has retired or left, you need to have adequate documentation so that whoever comes into that position, even if they have zero experience with floodplain management, they're able to figure out if that permit. So just
In the town's management.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so just like any other building permit, before the building permit is actually approved, you got to make sure that all other state and local permits are applied for, such as a wetland permit or a shoreland permit. Alrighty, so just going over some basic construction requirements that you need to be aware of. So for new construction, or what's called a substantial improvement, the top of the lowest floor must be elevated to the base flood elevation. That is that 100-year flood elevation or higher. Now, lowest floor does not mean first floor. Basements can be included in the definition of the lowest floor. And per the state building code, we have the lowest floor has to be elevated 1 foot above the base flood elevation. Now, what if there's no base flood elevation available? We have a lot of Zone A's in New Hampshire. And there's 2 ways that you can go about permitting development in a Zone A. One is you can have the homeowner pay a surveyor to determine the base flood elevation. And that can cost several thousands of dollars. Or option B, which we recommend using, is just whatever the highest adjacent grade is, just build 2 feet above that, and that's good enough. We've checked out with FEMA. FEMA approved using that rule as well, and that's a way to just be a lot more cost effective and not require someone to spend thousands of dollars on a survey. All right, so your utilities are also going to need to be above that base flood elevation. So a lot of people can put their utilities in the basement. If that basement is below the base flood elevation, those utilities need to be up on that 2nd floor. All right, so there are options to have development that's below that base flood elevation, but it has to meet these criteria. So it has to be designed or inadequately anchored to prevent flotation, so it's not going to go anywhere or it's not going to collapse. It's got to be constructed with flood-resistant materials and use methods and best practices to minimize flood damage. Now, FEMA has a great guidance document that spells out the best construction techniques for development below BFE. All right, so then you can also have garages, which we call enclosures below the lowest floor, but they have to be used solely for storage or building access or parking, cannot be below grade on every side. And then it also has to meet the minimum NFIP requirements related to flood openings, and I have a little bit of more information on another slide about flood openings. And then when all three of those criteria are met, it essentially exempts that area from being defined as the lowest floor because it's not really used for living space. At that point, it's been fully removed from living situation. All right, so a basement is technically any area of the building having its floor below grade on all sides. Now, in the special flood hazard area, we are not allowed to have basements below the base flood elevations. And for a lot of homes, that ends up meaning there's just no basement in general. And that includes a crawl space. FEMA does not necessarily care if it's a 2-foot or a 10-foot area. All of those heights are going to be considered a basement. Now, in a basement or enclosure below the base flood elevation, there is the requirement that you have to have 1 square inch of flood openings per every 1 square foot of enclosed space. Now, the purpose of this is to allow water into the basement during a flood to equalize the water pressure on both sides of the foundation so you don't have your foundation crumbling in. It is not to keep your basement dry during the flood. That's not the purpose of flood openings. Now, generally, you pair this with a sump pump so that after the flood has receded, then you can pump the water back out of your basement. And FEMA has a good guidance document on the requirements for these engineered flood openings. Now, we've been talking a lot about residential structures. Non-residential structures have an additional thing that you can do, which is called flood proofing. There's a wet and a dry version. Essentially, you let water in or you don't let water in. That's the main difference between the two. And FEMA has certificates to actually say that, oh, this structure for this area that's below the base flood elevation, we certify that it's been built according to our flood proofing requirements and it is compliant. All right, so a couple other things. There's also some requirements for floodways, which a lot of areas have mapped floodways. Some areas have unmapped floodways. But the main thing is you're not allowed to have any development in the floodway. If it's mapped, you have to have an engineering analysis determining that there's not going to be any increase in base flood elevation. If it's an unmapped floodway, you're allowed to have 1 foot of increase, but no more than that. But for both cases, you do need an engineering analysis to make that determination. All right, so the last couple requirements that we have for NFIP construction is that it has to be, or manufactured homes have to be on a permanent foundation with the lowest floor at or above the BFE. And it has to be securely anchored, so it's not going to move anywhere. Now, RVs, as long as they are on the site for fewer than 180 days, or consecutive days, or and they also have to be fully licensed and ready for highway use, aka on its wheels or a jacking system that's attached on site by only quick disconnect utilities, no permanent attachments. So RVs in the floodplain are fine as long as they're there temporarily. But once it becomes a non-temporary structure, then we're essentially going to consider it a manufactured home. And it has to meet all the manufactured home requirements. All right, the last thing.
What's a manufactured home?
A mobile home.
Okay.
Uh,
'Cause a lot of homes now are manufactured.
okay, so I don't mean like a prefab where it's like constructed
Offsite.
off-site.
Basically, a home
Trailer,
is
yeah.
on a trailer and then transferred to a solid foundation usually.
Is,
A home that would be transported on a trailer, and then usually it's often put on a solid foundation once it gets where it's going.
is a,
Oh, manufactured.
okay, so that's not, people call it mobile home then.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that is a mobile home.
Really?
Mobile home, trailer home. People call it different
I
things.
had a ranch house that came in pieces.
No, that's a
That's-
Yeah, that's
modular.
different, that's a modular.
Modular, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, modular.
No,
Yeah.
the whole thing is on a flatbed, it's regulated by like state, where,
Oh, yeah,
you know, it's.
Okay, modular.
And you can technically drive it away.
Yeah.
All right. So the last thing I wanted to talk about with construction requirements is that there is a rule that if anyone is making improvements that total more than half the market value of the house, you need to consider that as a new construction and make sure that that house is now compliant with all of the new or with the latest floodplain management regulations. And conversely, there's also substantial damage, meaning if the house has been damaged by more than half its market value, you also need to bring it into compliance as if it was a new construction. So this is the way to catch those houses that have been here for a very long time before we had flood maps, and to make sure that everything eventually becomes flood resistant. And the determination for this has to be made by your community. You must review all proposed costs and improvements for repairs submitted by the applicant, and also only make sure you use the market value of the structure if in determining these or making this determination. Now, lastly, we've talked about an elevation certificate. So there are a couple certifications that FEMA can make, and the elevation certificate is one of them. It is essentially a form that provides all of the as-built construction like heights for a building. Now, just a note, the elevation certificate will only certify the heights of the base flood elevation or the highest adjacent grade, the lowest floor, etc. But it is up to the community to then check that elevation certificate against your community regulations to determine if it is compliant. An elevation certificate does not equal the house is compliant. It just legally certifies these are the heights. All right, so talked about these regulations. Sometimes you run into an issue where you need to grant a variance. Generally, this is not advised. You should use it very rarely, and there are 3 very specific NFIP criteria and 5 specific state criteria that you have to meet and document to justify granting a variance against the community's floodplain regulations. And if you do issue a variance, make sure you document the reasons why, because if that construction causes damage, that is your community's only source of protection for that decision. All right, lastly, I know you've all been waiting for it, mapping update. So for the last 5 years or so, New Hampshire has been working with FEMA on updating the flood maps, watershed by watershed. And generally, it's kind of following these 3 development processes. So we start with data collection. That takes 1 to 2 years. And then after meeting with communities to determine where does it flood most often? What floodings are you most concerned about? Then FEMA issues a preliminary map there's some back and forth between FEMA and the community. The community has what's called an appeal period to submit surveying data to get a map revised, and then FEMA will republish the preliminary maps, and this can back and forth can go on for 3 years or more. So this map development process, there's not like a set timeline for how long that takes, but eventually both parties agree these are the final maps, and FEMA issues what's called a letter of final determination, and that starts the process where communities have 6 months from when you receive the letter of final determination to officially adopt the new floodplain maps. And after 6 months has gone by, then yay, your new maps are effective. So for the White Mountains, I've picked out the 4 watersheds that cover the area. So Coos County, it includes the Upper Connecticut, the Androscoggin, and Ammonoosuc rivers. Now, the preliminary maps have not been published yet. Those are anticipated to come out spring of next year. And then following that, if everything goes according to schedule, new maps should be out in 2028. Same thing for Grafton County and the Connecticut River watersheds of Grafton County. The Pemigewasset has already been published. Those maps are out. Now, the Saco River is about on the same timeline as Coos County. However, for those of you in lower or southern Carroll County or Belknap County, yay, you have preliminary maps available and currently are in the appeal period that ends in mid-October. And then if everything goes smoothly with that process, Belknap County and the Winnipesaukee watershed should receive their new maps in 2027. All right. So us at OPD, we are going through all of your community's floodplain ordinances to ensure that you have all of the required languages that FEMA needs. And we are trying to do that at least 1 to 2 years before you're going to get that letter of final determination, so that we don't run into any issue where you need to update floodplain maps and you don't have your ordinance updated and it's not time for town hall. So we're trying to make sure that we work with the town hall schedule so that by the time your community receives the letter of final determination, you are good to go and just ready to update that map date, and that's all you need to do. We have an RSA 67457 that allows New Hampshire municipalities to adopt the new flood insurance rate maps through a resolution by the local governing body. And the one condition is that you can update the flood insurance rate map date and title, and only that, no other language in the ordinance. So this is kind of gets us around where if you get a letter of final determination in April and your town hall is already passed and you only have 6 months to adopt, that allows you to adopt that new map in time for FEMA so that there's no issues with your community's participation. Alrighty, so I have some resources here for some of our trainings that we have at OPD, as well as how to view some of the maps and some information on adopting the flood insurance rate maps by FEMA. And that wraps up our OPD side of the presentation. So I'm going to bring it over to Luann for the private flood insurance.
Thank you. Were you taking questions now or at the end?
I was thinking at the end,
Okay.
since we did go a little over.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Stephanie. My name is Luann King, and I've worked for the New Hampshire Insurance Department for almost 8 years. My team and I, our role at the Insurance Department, we review all insurance documentation that is consumer-facing to make sure that it's compliant with all of New Hampshire statutes and rules, to make sure that the consumers are treated fairly. The other side of my team alongside of me, they do the market conduct audits, which mean after the claims are settled, audits are conducted to make sure that the insurance companies did what we told them to do or how we told them to do stuff. So just to stay in compliance, we are very much into consumer protection. And I only have like one slide that's going to touch on anything that we've already heard. The rest of my presentation really today is going to be about private flood insurance. That's where my team and we receive the policies that insurance companies want to issue to New Hampshire consumers. And that's what most of my presentation is going to be on. Just some important flood facts. Floods are the most common natural hazards in the United States, with causes ranging from heavy precipitation to hurricanes, winter storms, and snow melt. And over the past 50 years, Americans have seen a 20% increase in the heaviest downpours. The size of the nation's floodplains will likely grow by 40 to 45% over the next 90 years. And 99% of U.S. counties have been impacted by a flooding event since 1996. That's huge. Over the course of a 30-year mortgage, homeowners in the 100-year floodplain have a 1 in 4 chance or greater of being flooded, which is twice the chances of a fire damage. Floods can happen everywhere. People outside high-risk areas or the 100-year floodplain file over 20% of the flood insurance claims and receive 1/3 of disaster assistance for flooding. And this has been said before, but it can't be said enough. Your typical homeowner renter's policy or your business policy will always exclude flood. Water is one of the most trickiest perils to say what is covered, what isn't covered, when, and why. So if the flood is from a rain event, as the water is coming down, if damage is done to the general homeowner policy, you will have coverage for any damage as the rain is coming down. Once the rain is on the ground and a flood ensues, your same homeowner policy will exclude the damage from that water. And it's really important. And then like there's burst pipes. I think you mentioned burst pipes.
I was thinking dams too.
And, dams. Yeah, dams would always be considered a flood, but burst pipes are going to be situational. Is it in the winter? Did you maintain the heat? There are so many things I can't say, yes, your homeowner will always cover it, and it won't. There are situations around that would depend. So there are coverages. There are times where that's covered, and there are times where that's not covered. Water is like the trickiest peril to say when it is and isn't, except for flood. It's never covered under your typical homeowner's policy. I'm going to just skim over. So it's required by federally backed mortgage lenders if you live in a high risk flood zone. And NFIP has been covered very well. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the private options and a little bit about the differences between the federal option and the private. Yes.
Hi, can you jump back?
Yes, I can. How do I jump back?
No, that's, you leave the screen up. 100-year floodplain is very misleading.
It is, yep.
Can you get into that a little bit more so not everybody thinks, okay, we're only gonna have this once every 100 years? Because we all know that
Yes.
we've had 3 or 4 of the 100-year
Oh,
floods
yes.
in the Mount Washington Valley in the last 3 years.
Did you want to take that?
If you want me to,
Yes,
I can.
yes.
So it's just a statistic. So essentially, if you have 100 white golf balls in a bowl, or 99 golf balls in a bowl, and then you have one red one, and every time you reach in there, you grab out a golf ball, there is a 1 in 100% chance that you grab that red one. And then after you pull it out, if you pull that red one, oh, that's my flood. But every time you pull one, you have to put that ball back in there. So any given day that you're pulling one of those balls out, you could pull the red one, oops. Next day, oops, again. And so that frequency of that 100-year flood can occur in any given year, multiple times a year. It's just, on average, you're only going to see this about once in every 100 years. Now, that has been changing recently. I know you probably have seen the last 4 years. There's been a lot more very devastating floods in the White Mountains. So yeah, that pattern is changing, but it's only been very recently, so we can't say with any confidence like which way things are going to be going.
Thank you. So just a few things that are going to be different from the policy that you would get from the federal level, which, by the way, we at the insurance department, we do not regulate the federal policies. We regulate the private flood policies, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But so some of the differences between the federal policies and the private policies are like the premium is going to be about $600 or $700 annually. That's an average. But like we've already talked about, there's so many different characteristics and so forth. And the maximum limits for the dwelling itself, for the house itself, is $250,000. In today's market, we know that that's not going to be sufficient. This is where if you have an NFIP policy, you have the ability to go out and purchase an excess private flood policy that would give you that would bridge that gap from the 250 maximum to whatever the limit is that you need. And the contents is capped at 100,000 as well. Oops, oh my goodness, what happened? Hold on, wait 1 second. There we go. And loss of use is not available on the NFIP policy, which means like when you are displaced and when there has been a catastrophic flood and you're no longer safe to live in your home and you have to go somewhere else to reside, whether it be a hotel or wherever, the loss of use, the added expense is not built into the NFIP policy, where it is going to be built into the private flood policies that are available. And there's usually a 30-day waiting period once you purchase an NFIP policy where you cannot submit a flood claim for that first 30 days. Conversely, the private flood insurance, these are the policies that are going to be sold by the for-profit companies, the private insurance companies. They depend on reinsurers in order to back their, this is the difference. They're not federally backed. They're going to be backed by reinsurers. So reinsurers are just basically insurance companies writing policies for insurance companies. That's reinsurance. Again, all on the private side. And the private policies are going to cover your dwelling, your other structures like your garages and outbuildings, loss of use when you're displaced, resiliency programs, and damaged contents. The private flood policies can offer higher limits and enhanced coverages over the NFIP. There's generally no waiting period, although some private companies will have you wait 14 days from the time that you start your policy until you can submit a claim, and they can offer broader protection at sometimes better rates. Now let's talk a little bit about being prepared. The best advice I can give all of us, and this is not just for flood, this is for just because every one of us should have a home inventory. It could be something if you like to write it down on paper, put it on a spreadsheet. But what I recommend is every one of us pretty much has a cell phone. You just put it on video or you take pictures. I put mine on video and I just walk around the house, go in your closets, attics, garages, basements, places that you don't necessarily go all the time. And that can be backed up to the cloud. My cell phone automatically backs up to the cloud. You never want to have your only copy of your inventory in your property, because in the event of a catastrophe, you're not going to have access to it. So if you do have a paper written inventory, maybe a safety deposit box, friend, relative, someplace off-site, and keeping receipts for large purchases or appraisals, that should also be kept off-site or digitally like on your camera. And of course, if you have like a collection of something, let's just say firearms, for example, under your typical homeowners or renters policy, they have what they call special limits of liability. Firearms is one of the categories, which means your policy is only going to pay the dollar figure on the special limit of liability. If you have a large collection of firearms that exceeds that cap, you can schedule your collection and then have your entire collection covered for replacement cost. These are independent things, so talk to yourself, have I made any major purchases? Do I need to make any substantial changes to my policy? Have that conversation with your agent. There are ways to protect everything all the time. I know this is about flood, but this is just good advice in general. So then a flood occurs, and when it's safe to do so, the first thing you should be doing is calling your insurance company and reporting the damage. An insurance policy is a contract. It's two parties are involved. It's the insured and the insurance company. Both of them have responsibilities. As an insured, your responsibility is to report a loss timely when it's safe to do so, and to follow the instructions from your insurance agent. Because if you do not do the steps that your policy requires you to do, you could be jeopardizing your coverage. What I mean by that is, one of your responsibilities is just to mitigate additional damage, if it's safe to do so, whatever that might mean. Put a tarp over something to stop, if it's raining, to stop extra damage. So they're not going to pay you if you didn't just take steps that a prudent person would take to prevent more damage. They're not going to pay for the more damage. They're only going to pay for what you should have, what occurred originally. They're an agent of the company, so when they tell you to do something, it's as if the company themselves is telling you to do something. If you follow what your agent advises, you will never jeopardize your coverage because they're an agent of the insurance company. And as hard as this is, don't throw away stuff that's damaged until you're told to do so, because the insurance company may or may not send an adjuster, or they may accept photos, but either way they want to have documentation of the damaged goods. It will be tempting to just get it out of sight, out of mind, because it could be sentimental. Don't do it until you're told to do it. And just remember, like in the event of a flood, most likely this is not just happening to you, this is happening to a community. So everything could be delayed like 4 to 8 weeks. You may experience, I work with somebody who was involved in a flood, and he said they were so inundated with claims, they allowed him to just submit photos, and they settled the claim just with his photos without waiting for an adjuster to go out, because the adjusters are spread so thin when it involves a lot of people. So, yes?
I always thought one of the things that was really important is to get that stuff cleared out right away because of mold, et cetera.
If your insurance company is accepting, like, so if your insurance agent says, by all means, let's, get rid of that to
But if they
minimize the
don't say
mold,
that,
right, just follow whatever they say, because they are an agent of the company, and otherwise you might be jeopardizing your coverage limits. And then I also have helpful resources, websites that will help guide you to more information. And I'd like to open it up now and I should just say, so for the state of New Hampshire, I can tell you that there are roughly 44 companies that write private flood insurance, and it's it's a little light on the commercial, it's a little more heavy on the personal line side of the house, so your homeowners versus your business. And it ranges from primary private, or excess, which that excess is what we were talking about before, when you have the federal policy as your primary layer, and then you need that extra, you can get the excess private. So there are policies available in the state of New Hampshire, and your best resource is your agent. I'd like to say trustedchoice.com is a really good website to use, trustedchoice.com, and it'll allow you to put in where you live and what you're looking for. So you would put in your zip code and you'd put in flood, and it will give you a list of the agents nearest you that would be able to provide information or policies for you. And I'd like to open it up to any questions. Yes?
I have a quick question, comment. I tend to agree with Kathy. Kathleen, I'm on the emergency management side of the house, which I realize is a different side of your house as well. But anytime you have flooded homes, correct me if I'm wrong, all that is absorbed, the flood water, can then be considered hazardous material.
Well, your agent very well may tell you to snap pictures or what, again, it's going to depend on how many, how thin their adjusters are spread. They very well may give you that advice. I'm just saying, just don't have the flood and throw everything away. Just make that call, get that permission, if you want to call it that, before you do, because they just need to see the damaged items so that they can then replace, give you the insurance money to replace it. That's all. Just don't instantaneously throw it all away. Wait till you've had that conversation with your agent and make sure everybody's on the same page. And I think we're going to wrap it up with Keith. I think you, Deputy Commissioner Nyan, you have some closing remarks?
Sure, I can make closing remarks.
Do we have more questions after you?
Oh, absolutely. So I just want to come and say thank you very much, everybody, for being here. We know there's lots of questions, and we will stay, at least from the insurance department side, as long as you have questions, we'll sit and answer those. But thank you very much to our colleagues across the state. And that having been said, what questions can we answer for you?
So I was curious when you were talking about the community rating system, that your community, complies with different ordinances and everything. Was there a component of public information and education? I'm on the emergency management side of the house, which I guess is literally this side of the house. And as we basically share all of that information, is that something that communities can get additional discounts for, or is it really more sort of related to the ordinances and things like that?
It is related to specific actions that the community takes. Now,
If I send those to you.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a mitigation thing that she's talking about.
Yeah, so
Preparedness thing.
the community rating system is something that the community has to sign up for and pass an audit.
Okay.
So a community assistance visit where we and FEMA come out to review your policies and your floodplains and look at some permits to see how things are. And then once you pass that audit and like we say, yeah, you're running this program smoothly and great, then you guys would officially be part of the CRS program. And at that point, CRS has specific activities that count for a certain amount of points, and for every 500 points, you get a 5% insurance discount, and so that's how it kind of works.
Okay, so you could be, our community's in the flood insurance program, but you might not be in the CRS.
Yes.
Got it, okay.
So CRS is something you can provide in addition.
Okay.
For your residences, just because it does give them more discounts on their insurance, and it also helps your community be more flood resilient in the first place.
Okay, and then one more question, sorry.
Go ahead. It's not really a question.
So I'm just curious with changes with FEMA, federal versus states, is this something that's possibly gonna all come down to the states to be administering? You probably can't answer that.
There's a lot of conversations about what's going to be happening with that. I have not officially heard of any changes at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, at the moment, things are
Cooking along.
staying as they were.
So I can jump in. Myself and Commissioner Betancourt met with our federal delegation in DC a couple months back, in particular around the NFIP funding. And there's certainly an effort across party lines in Washington to continue to make sure the program is funded at the federal level. So while there's no guarantees, it's something which it's nice to see some bipartisan support for. So.
Okay, that's great.
And we will be holding a CRS users group meeting soon, hopefully within the next month, which is just going to provide some information about the CRS program and what kinds of actions you guys can take.
Okay.
Those are quarterly meetings.
So I see that those are links. Could you send, if we sign up, can we get this slide deck? Because I saw throughout here that there were things that were links.
Is this just going to automatically be sent to those who registered?
Yes, I will send all the slides one.
I did not
Yeah,
register.
I'll send a link to the recording. And,
I'll forward it to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm unregistered.
Grab my card on before you leave, and I'll make sure you get it.
Now, just a show of hands, are anyone here just residences, or do you all have, okay, So we have a decent mix between residences and community officials then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a resident with the National Flood Insurance Program and Emergency Management Director.
Okay, so you're both.
Yeah, yep.
I'm a
All right.
real
I
estate
dealt with a
agent.
huge flood in our town, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So how do you know if you need to get this stuff?
To have flood
Call
insurance,
an agent, call a private company?
So-
How do I know? I mean,
simple rule
I live on a
is
hill, I mean, how's it gonna flood
if
there?
you are in
Easily.
the mapped floodplain and so if you're not in the mapped floodplain, you have no obligation to purchase flood insurance. It's all optional for you. You don't have to do anything. But if you do live in the floodplain and you have a federally backed mortgage, then that's going to require you to have flood insurance. But if you're billionaire and just bought your house out of cash and have no mortgage or anything, there's not technically any requirement for you to have flood insurance. And that's kind of the choice is you, if you don't purchase flood insurance because you just bought your house outright, that is the risk, the financial risk that you are then personally taking on, that if anything happens to your house, you don't have that insurance, so you're gonna have to foot the bill.
But he said he's on a hill.
How do you know if I need it? Like, I live on a hill.
So I
Let's
think
say the hill's this big.
So I think the short answer is it's your tolerance for risk. There is no law that requires you to buy it, whether or not
I
you need it,
understand.
right? So whether or not you need it or not is up to you. So we talking, I thought you did a great job talking about the 100-year flood and the odds. We had a storm roll through the Concord, Manchester area 2 days ago, I think it was.
I got a great video of the funnel cloud.
So it was, okay, so I was driving at the time, and certainly you live on a hill, your risk of groundwater flooding isn't high. So if you were to buy a private flood policy, your premiums would be pretty gosh darn low. However, if that event comes through your home and that flash flood is catching water in perhaps basins you're unaware, maybe it's on your property, and that water goes into your home, you're gonna wish you had flood insurance. And most likely it's gonna be private. So, great explanation. You're not required to buy it.
So who do you go to? I thought we were gonna learn about it from here. Who do you call?
So,
I mean,
I'm just thinking, I'm gonna maybe try to answer your question, but tell me if it's right, because, going to the flood insurance rates maps, I mean, this is what we're doing, looking at where you are in relationship to those maps online, but, I mean, I don't know what town you're in, but I would go right to the town offices too, and see if you qualify.
What town?
what about my homeowners? Could I just call those people and say, hey?
So
Jeff,
no one's going to
can I-
tell you if you need to buy home insurance. As a
I have
representative,
home insurance.
I'm sorry, for flood insurance.
But can I call my home insurance people and say, hey, can I put a flood insurance on?
Yeah.
Oh,
Pretty simple, right?
So how to buy one or from where to buy it? Certainly you could, I would start with that agent. You could call your home insurance company and they might tell you if they sell it or not. But I guess I misunderstood your question. I thought you said who was going to tell you if you should buy it.
No, I'm wondering where,
So
how I should find out if I should have it and who do I get it from? So start with my homeowners.
So Luann had
Maybe.
mentioned the website Trusted Choice, and at the insurance department, we always recommend people use an independent agent who's not affiliated with any one company or another, and so that way they can get a wide range of products, prices, that sort of thing. So we would recommend going to Trusted Choice or
Floodsmart.gov, so you can actually get NFIP, you can shop for NFIP coverage right from floodsmart.gov. There's a phone number and contact information right on there.
If I'm
That's
not
right,
in a
that's really
floodplain,
good.
I can't buy it. And
No, you
You
can.
can.
Oh, you can.
So as long as you're, at least for the National Flood Insurance Program, you can buy flood insurance regardless if you're in the floodplain or not. You just have to be in a community that participates.
Right.
What community, if you don't mind me asking?
This one.
This one? Yeah, then Conway is a participating community, so NFIP is available to you, even if you're not in the floodplain.
and you can get additional coverage through a private insurer by calling, like I said, we Trusted Choice, any independent agent.
Whoever I have for my house insurance, they're brokers, they deal with everybody.
Absolutely, yeah.
But people on hills have had flood damage.
Sure. Yeah.
Not
I could see.
anywhere near a
That's
river or
where a lot of the
lowland
flash
or
flooding.
anything.
So I would say you're more at risk for flash flooding if you're on a gravel road and if the drainage ditches are not cleared consistently. that's when you would be more at a risk for damages from a flash
There's
flood.
condo development above me, so who knows what problems that could
Yeah, you
change
may,
the
you
water
may be
flow.
on a hill, but
It's
there
a-
may be bigger hills around you that don't consider you a hill.
No, I know.
So-
Yeah, I call my agent and get a quote, because I'm in a low-risk area too, and it's chump change if you're in a low-risk.
That's what I'm thinking, okay.
If you're
In
a
lower
high-
risk,
If
it's-
you're in a high-risk area, it's expensive. The
It's
house
very
I found
affordable.
at Boston, Massachusetts, got about $10,000.
Yikes.
Any other questions?
Yeah, she hasn't, she's
Yes.
been waiting.
A couple different questions in
It's less than
different areas of the
$500.
presentation.
Yeah.
One of them, you mentioned under floodplain development that storage of materials counts. Does that also count inside excavation pits?
For what, stuff that they made, gravel,
Give her-
sand?
give her
Gravel
a
that
card
they've
and call her
excavated
back.
that's.
Excavated it, and graded it, and
So-
sorted it and all that?
Yeah. and
There's a
they're
project
storing it
already
in an area that's
ongoing.
close to the
Value.
floodplain.
Well, I guess, so FEMA, considers temporary structures and permanent structures a little differently. So if this is like an ongoing development thing, that they're just leaving the excavator there because they don't wanna like tow it back to the place every
They're
night.
leaving piles of gravel and sand and stuff like that.
So as long as after the fact, that's all dealt and gone away and tucked away with, then it's fine. But if that is permanently, if they're permanently going to be storing that gravel or sand or whatever there,
How long
then
does permanently count for, like the duration of an excavation permit and beyond?
yeah, essentially, if it goes over the permit period, then at that point, well, one, it's no longer permitted, and two, then I think FEMA would be potentially considering that as a permanent change at that point. But that's one of those questions where it's kind of a gray area, and I would likely need to have a conversation with FEMA about the specifics of the project.
Okay.
And you said you had a couple other questions?
Yeah, so that was one. Another one, this is kind of a multi-part thing about the CRS. We've been having trouble getting exact information about the history of properties that have been impacted by previous floods in our town, and we're trying to get into the CRS. Is there any way to get past that exact number to get the initial inspection?
I might be
Or
able
is
to-
there somebody that could help us
That would
get
probably
to
be
that
helpful
number?
to have that would probably be helpful for us to like set up a meeting with you and to talk specifically about.
That
your-
would be
Yeah,
awesome.
like are you talking about like getting that repetitive loss property information?
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah.
I've asked in a couple different directions and people told me either I can't help you or I'm not the one that does that anymore. or-
Because in the last year, FEMA decided to change the rules on how that works, and then as of tomorrow, they're gonna announce that, oh, we're going back to the way things were going.
Oh,
So
well, you're talking about the private.
maybe you and I
Yeah.
can talk
Yeah.
offline about that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
another question I had is, did I understand correctly that if we do get into the CRS, that any benefits will affect everybody in the community now on?
Yeah.
So we really wanna do that.
Yes,
That's
it is very, very beneficial for your residences. The CRS is a really good program. And we only have 5 participating communities in CRS in the whole state right now, none of which are coastal.
But you should call our office, I don't know if you talked with our officer, but like she said, literally they're changing
Yeah.
the rules like imminently to make it easier for us to help you to
Okay.
answer those questions.
Yeah, that would be great, because we've been trying for over a year and
Yeah.
really struggling to get the
Mhm.
details.
And that's
we
about
need.
how long they decided they weren't gonna help with that anymore, so. So they're going back to helping with that.
Awesome, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, my third question was if I could get more details about how the new rate structure for the way that insurance.
Risk rating 2.0.
Risk rating 2.0
And we have a whole
works
page,
and,
we have
yeah,
a page on our website
because
for risk rating, and
Yeah.
we can definitely talk with you more about it too.
we'd like to look at a couple of specific, case scenarios and see how it would impact development for some projects. that we're
That's
looking
something
into.
you might wanna talk with the FEMA insurance branch specialist on,
That would
because
be
we
awesome, yeah.
really work with community regulations and we don't know a lot of the insurance rating side of things. That's a different branch of FEMA. So like we know of the, yeah, that's,
We can give you a contact.
Yeah.
That would be
Person
great, yeah.
That would
That would be
able to
super
give you some
helpful.
more specific information than we could.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, it would also might help you, again, from the emergency management side of the house. Every town in the state of New Hampshire is required to do a hazard mitigation plan every 5 years. In that hazard
We were part of
mitigation
that and
plan,
we don't have that information.
in what town?
Woodstock.
Yes, I remember getting the question about that one and asking FEMA for the information. They wouldn't give it to me.
Yeah.
Sorry about
Um,
that. For any other town.
but hopefully, very soon, that will be changing.
Thank you.
Any more
What do you guys
questions?
do to piss them off like that? Just curious.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We'll stick around for a few minutes. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.